Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad we're able to come together at this Zoom meeting. This is a speaker series that we run every month and throughout the year. And tonight we're very pleased to have Sheila Weston and Denece Dodson join us. I'm going to say a few words of introduction and thank them for coming to give this presentation, and then we'll jump into the presentation. I'll be sort of managing letting people in from the waiting room. I'll also be keeping an eye on the chat. As we go through the presentation, if you want to put questions in the chat, that's great. We're going to have a question and answer session after the presentation. So if you can save your questions until after, Sheila and Denece are both going to answer those questions for us as we go. Um, so I'm really pleased to have Sheila and Denece join us. I'll say a few words of introduction, a little bio on their background. They're both, of course, members of the Mount Diablo Beekeepers Association, and they're also both master gardeners. Sheila Weston began gardening at an early age in England. Throughout moves to California, Australia, and then back to California. She has always had a garden, from pots on an apartment windowsill to a large suburban lot. She has been a master gardener since 2009, and this has led to a greater awareness of the importance of bees of all kinds and how we can plan our gardens to benefit both the gardener and the bees. She's kept honeybees since 2016 and currently has 3 backyard colonies together with fruit trees, vegetable garden, chickens, and assorted bee-friendly plants in her Pleasant Hill garden. Denece Dodson followed her lifelong interest in plant world and became a master gardener in 2012 and a horticultural therapist in 2016. She's particularly interested in trees, herbs, and vegetables. She has worked at the local VA campus in Martinez, providing lessons in gardening and helping disabled vets create their own community garden. As a beekeeper of many years, and only by happenstance, Denece added native plants after recognizing there weren't any blooms during the dearth one August. She vowed that she would do better focusing on year-round, drought-tolerant, and abundant food resources for her bees, and it was back to bee basics. So please join me in welcoming Sheila and Denece and their presentation on pollinator gardens. Thank you.
Oh, we got it up.
Oh, you know what? There we go.
Well, welcome, and thanks, Ian, for inviting Sheila and I. We're honored to be here tonight to talk to our members of the Bee Club. And there's a ton of information out there about gardening and about bees. And we did our best we could do to bring together a lot of this information based on what we felt was the best research. And together with our personal experience as beekeepers and gardeners, to see what we could do to sort of condense the plethora of information that's available out there. We've been gardeners long enough, both of us, to know that there's still a lot yet to learn. I think we as beekeepers also have that same experience. There's always something new to learn. Oops. As beekeepers, many of us find that our bees do not get enough nourishment if we don't supplement their diet with carbohydrate substitutes, i.e. sugar, water, or some other, and or protein during the times when flowers aren't blooming or there's a dearth. And frequently we discovered we have that happen here in August and September, kind of those dry months following summer. But there's no doubt that the same as with humans, that whole foods are better for health and well-being. And flowers give bees complete nutrition naturally. So you can see the bee on the left doing its thing, going in for nectar.
Look.
So simple solution to that is to plant flowers that are both nectar and pollen rich. There are certainly different varieties, a lot of them that grow in our area. We're blessed that we have the ability to grow as many different varieties that we do in this area. And many of these things bloom at different times of the years, which is especially important to give bees the different nutritional things that they need in pollen and nectar throughout. We always want our bees to be able to find food somewhere. So if we observe plants that have bees on them, that's the best way to start the practice of how to put in a garden and how to think about a garden for bees. Now, we're both aware that there's many keen gardeners in the beekeeping group. So in some instances, we're going to be preaching to the choir here. But for those of you that are new to beekeeping or new to gardening, or just want to figure out what more you can do to facilitate bee nutrition in your yards, we're going to try and answer some of those questions. But we just want to encourage you to take a walk. You know, when you're in your neighborhood, look around to see what the bees are on. Are they seeing a big shrub that's got a lot of different flowers on it and the bees are really attracted? And then what would you say that you thought the characteristics of those plants were that you were looking at? And is there a certain cluster that you see that bees are very attracted to when they're visiting and foraging?
Questions already.
So while you're observing different plants and plantings in your neighborhood, in your own yard, you need to think about variety, because all these different varieties of flowers are going to offer something a little bit different to not only other pollinators, but to our honeybees. And then density is really important for bees to be able to be attracted to see, to scent, and all these things. You need to think about a density of color. I don't know if how many of you have been aware of dryscaping and different ways of planting your yard. And so putting in a density is just a little bit different way of thinking about planting for bees.
Okay. Okay, so when you're thinking about developing your bee garden, there's a few questions you need to consider. Are you planning a new garden or are you developing an existing one? How much space do you have? And what kind of plants do you envision? Do you want trees, shrubs, a nice border, or just sort of fill in plants between existing ones, or even, you know, putting them in your vegetable garden? Another consideration is water. Do you have a convenient water source close by, whether it's a hose bib, or else do you have an existing drip system that you can modify? We've got tons of resources about how to develop and everything to do with bee gardens, and we will post those up on the website. So don't worry about keeping up with the links or resources that we're talking about now, because they will be posted on the website later on. And thinking about preparation, there's a great document from the Xerxes Society on habitat site preparation, and that link will be posted as well. So in order to have a successful garden of any kind, whether it's a pollinator garden or any other kind, there's a few foundations of success. Preparation is really important. First thing is, do you know what your soil type is? Because healthy soil means everything in supporting plants, especially for in-ground planting. Do you know whether it drains well? Because most plants don't like sitting in wet feet, and that certainly goes for the lower water use plants that we're looking at for bee gardens. And knowing your soil type also helps you with planning for watering, because as you no doubt know, our local clay soils hold water really well. But if you live out in East County and you have sandy soil, then you're going to have to plan on watering a bit more. When you're thinking about what plants you want, what is the bloom time of those plants? You know, do they have a long bloom period, or are they just going to be a flash in the pan and be wonderful for a few days or a few weeks? And the last major thing is sun. What is your sun exposure? Because most plants have a different preference for sun or part shade or even shade. And I've noticed that most of the bee-friendly plants that we know about most of them are in the sun, and I've noticed in my yard, even a plant that has a lot of bees on it in the sun, when the sun moves away, then there's not so many bees there. So sun and bee plants go really well together. And then thinking about what plants are most attractive to the bees. And there again, we're going to get into that a little bit further on. But there's certain flower features that bees prefer that allows them better access to nectar and pollen. They need to be able to get at it. So those fluffy puffball dahlias or whatever, they're not going to allow the bees to get in there. So that's the thing to think about it. And we'll get more on that later. Observe what grows well in your area. We talked about taking a walk before, but if a plant is growing really well in your neighbor's yard or in a really local park, then it probably will do well in your yard too. The time of bloom, we want to try and have something growing for most of the year if we can. So don't just plant plants that look wonderful in the summer. We want them to, in the spring and fall, and maybe in the winter if we can as well. So varieties to have a year-round bloom. And really, in our climate, we really have to consider water use. So choose low or moderate water use plants. Unfortunately, many good bee plants fall into this category. But you need to be aware that even low water use plants, including natives, still need some water. And especially for the first year after planting, they need regular irrigation until they're established. Next,
So what are foragers going to be attracted to when they're flying? Well, wide, flat pads and single flowers. For example, when you think about a poppy, it's a saucer shape. And so it's easy for the bees to get in and get the nectar, the pollen. And there's just not much nectar. It's kind of the shape of the flower sort of helps facilitate that. Bell-shaped flowers enclose the nectar. So bees have to enter it in order to get to the nectar. And in the process, they get coated with pollen. So bees maybe rob nectar from the base of a flower petal by drilling a little hole, and then they can go in and get the nectar. I've got these purple salvias. I think they're the Kennedy salvia, that are bell-shaped, and it's probably on its year 4 or 5, getting quite woody. But the bumblebees come, the hummingbirds come, and then also the honeybees are coming. So it's interesting how they share those flower petals and go in to get the nectar. Some are at the base of that flower, and then some are actually going inside the flower, and the ones coming out are the ones that are having some pollen. Bees fly very fast, very high. They can see individual flowers when traveling at a high rate of speed. And this is because they can respond better to moving objects than those that are stationary. That's why honeybees have no trouble pollinating flowers that are in motion. And it's also why it's rather useless to try swatting at a bee because it has no trouble avoiding you as a moving object. So the cool things is bees' eyes and anatomy are superpowers. So they've got 2 compound eyes for seeing shapes and colors, and they have 3 ocelli eyes for navigation, orientation, and to help locate the sun. They see ultraviolet, blue, violet, and purple. And it's like a blue halo effect. You can see that on the right flower, how that's just sort of a luminescence, iridescence too. But there's no photoreceptors for red, and often white flowers do have some UV parts. Also, the bees navigate by scent. So some flowers, such as sunflowers, pansies, and primroses, have nectar guides that can only be seen in an ultraviolet light. And if nectar is in red petal flowers is ultraviolet, that's why you would see bees on red petals in the flowers. And as it turns out, pollination is almost accidental with honeybees as it gets transferred from flower to flower.
Okay, so you've decided that, you've chosen some plants. So where in your yard are you going to put them and how are you going to plant them? Ideally, plant in patches rather than a border with all sorts of individual plants mixed up, because bees tend to work a single species at a time. So if you have patches, ideally about 3 feet square of the same variety, then they can see this better, and it's more it's better for them. They need to expend less resources feeding that going to a larger patch of flowers. Depending on space, bees will visit small container gardens and also narrow strips inside yards. So if you don't have a lot of space, you can still plant. The other place, which is a really great place for flowers, is in your vegetable garden, either around the edge or in the middle. I've seen a fantastic tomato garden with sunflowers interspersed with the tomatoes, because they're all tall, and the bees are all over the sunflowers, and it doesn't take up any extra space in the yard. You can, in my yard, I get a borage seed self seeds all over the place, but it always ends up in the middle of my vegetable garden. And if it's in the way, I do pull it out, but if it's not, then I'll leave it. So, and it has the added advantage of attracting bees to pollinate your squash and other things. Okay, we haven't really talked much about herbs, but they're another really good thing to fit into small spaces. Stuff like catmint, basil are really attractive to bees. We also talk about landscape and fruit trees later on, but they're an important part of a bee garden. And we'll also talk about use of cover crops, which you can put in if you've got a space in your garden that's not being used for anything else right now, like, a winter vegetable garden or something, then planting a cover crop which flowers in the spring both feeds your soil and the bees. So that's a double whammy there. Another point is that tidy gardens don't actually work that well, because a lot of times the flowers are just pruned out, or maybe it's just grasses and green things, and you don't have much food for the bees. Bees love messy gardens. So the idea is to leave the flowers on as long as possible. Now, in order to encourage more flowering, then you'll need to deadhead. But we don't want to prune off a plant that still has viable flowers on it, but that's still providing food for the bees. And so it may look a bit ratty sometimes, but I don't think it does. And when you're looking at plant selection, it's best to use local plant lists, such as from the Berkeley Urban Bee Lab, or also the UC Davis Bee Garden. If you look online, some of the plant lists for bees come from other parts of the country. And as we know, with our Mediterranean climate here, a lot of those plants don't work well here. So use local lists. And there's a lot of really good resources that we have in our list. CalScape for native plants is good. And the Sonoma County Beekeepers Association has a great gardening section. One more really important thing I wanted to mention is water. As we all know, bees need a reliable water source. And I learned the hard way that this needs to go out early in the season. Because if when the bees start building up brood and building up their themselves, they need a lot of water. And if they can't find it, they'll go to your neighbor's swimming pool or somewhere where you don't want them. I learned about putting it out early because I had this wonderful contraption here with, I filled this barrel with rainwater and had a nice inclined slope going down to a high water use plant. I thought, well, this wooden board will be great for the bees. But I don't think I put it out till like May or something. That was way too late, and the bees never found it. My favorite one now is a chicken waterer. Now I have a 5-gallon chicken waterer, and I filled the tray here with lava rocks. And these lava rocks are really good because they're porous, they hold more water, they give a really good solid surface for the bees to stand on. And I found this out by accident because I had the water out for my chickens. And I looked there one day during the summer and it was covered with bees. So I set up this one just for the bees with the lava rocks in it, and I bought another one for the chickens. We thought this was rather a cool picture from Slide Ranch in Marin. It's a sloped concrete thing with a dripping tap up there, which gives the bees plenty of place to set down and isn't going to drown them. Okay, I think. Okay.
So getting to pesticides, every garden's going to have pests. We can't get around it because gardens are an attractant for all kinds of creatures, critters, pollinators, one and all. And so a recommendation on pesticides is don't use any if possible. What we would suggest is if you do have a pest and you potentially it's starting to get a little bad, we use what we call integrated pest management, or IPM, which is a UC promoted combination of techniques in order to how you approach handling pests in the garden. It includes an accurate pest ID, which is really important because insects go through various life cycles, and sometimes the recommendation that you'll find is saying it's better to treat the eggs, or it's better to treat the larval stage or the adult insect. So you kind of have to have the keen powers of observation to really look at what's going on with your garden and with the pest. So an accurate pest ID, prevention, cultural practices, doing physical or mechanical methodology, and biological control. So it's kind of a pyramid, starting with the easiest, least invasive, and most hands-off way to approach doing with a pest. But if you have a situation where the pest really can't be controlled by any other methods, you do have several options. Do your research and find a UC recommended product, which would also be the least harmful. And you have to be careful if you're going to be using an organic product, because if you're spraying an insect and you also happen to spray a bee, it's going to coat the bee and it's going to be problematic. So, we have to be careful with anything that we're spraying on our plants. So, an example would be if you don't want to harm a bee, but you've got a spray. There's a copper dormant spray, spinosad. Again, it's high up on the, last resort, but it's okay once dry on the plant if you spray it, but you must not spray on the bee. And so it's really important, if you're going to use an application of anything, that you really time it for the time of day, for dusk, or for early morning to do anything with your plants. And if you really want to, you can just choose to remove the plant if the pest infestation is too great. And part of it is just a matter of what can you tolerate in your garden. How much leaf chewing can you tolerate? But I know that Sheila's gone out in the dark with a flashlight to spray to take care of some pest problems because she didn't want it to impact the bees. And the other thing is talking to your neighbors, because it's well enough and good if you know and you're managing your space what your neighbor might be doing, what they might be spraying their lawn with, what they might be spraying their trees with, and so forth. So it's really good to as much tact as you can, but inform them about the benefits of bees and all pollinators, and how they might want to approach the pesticides that they're choosing to use.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Did I hit that too
Nope,
soon?
that's good. So let's talk about native bees, because they share space with the honeybees, and the honeybees share space with our native pollinators, as well as others that are really important for our local habitat. So a question that comes up frequently is, do they compete for food? Well, yes and no, they do. There's been a lot of research out there. Randy Oliver, through Scientific Beekeeping, has reported on some of his latest research, different countries, different places where they've been actively looking at the issue. And it comes up to be depends. It's a yes and it's a no. But it's important that we keep the other pollinators strong, particularly our native bees, because they provide more diversity, more specialization, and actually they're better pollinators. So, you know, if it comes down to it and a commercial beekeeper needs to rely a lot upon the native bees that are in the area, it's important that we've planted for them and help to cultivate our other pollinators. Honeybees are generalist, and as the native bees are often, more often than not, they're specialist. So what happens also with invasive weed species is our honeybees are really excellent pollinators of the flowers of an invasive weed species, which is great for beekeepers and honeybees, but it's really not good for our local habitat and environment. So we come up a lot with yes and no.
Okay.
Mhm. Oh, we have other pollinator guests in your garden. I don't know how many of you have ever noticed how many different pollinators that you may have ever seen on one flower, but sunflowers really provide an opportunity to see more than one, between butterflies, moths, hummingbirds, flies, bumblebees, all kinds of plants. And the cool thing about sunflowers too is in the end, they're great bird food, if the squirrels don't get them first.
Okay.
And here, this upper left picture is a dense patch of flowers. It's located in our garden, Master Garden, Demo Garden, and Shadelands in Walnut Creek. And I counted 5 pollinators in probably around noon one day: bumblebee, honeybee, a surfeit fly, and then 2 other native bees that were there in the area. And there may have been more, but they were all just alighting and sharing space. And the one on the lower right, which is great because it shows the pad there when you've got both a butterfly moth species and looks like a native bee.
Yeah.
And we have our bumblebees.
All right. Okay, let's talk about some of our personal favorites. This is, whoops, where did we go? Yeah,
No,
no,
this way.
wrong way, sorry. Okay, this is a short list of my favorite plants. There's a whole lot more, but borage, of course, is top of the list. Everybody likes that, and the bees absolutely love it. Phacelia, which you can see here, is it's a California native plant, but the bumblebees really love it. Now, I have seen honeybees on that, but it's more attractive to the bumblebees. You can see one of those guys there. Citrus, of course. Bottlebrush trees have a long flowering period. I use cover crops, and especially on fava beans and vetches and other things that flower in the spring. Bush germander, which we have a photograph later, which has very unshowy flowers, but it flowers early in the year, and the bees love it. Poppies, of course, and sunflowers, and many more. And since we put this slide together, my new favorites are Palo Verde tree. I planted a Palo Verde several years ago, and when that thing flowers, it is just absolutely smothered with bees. Unfortunately, the main flowering period is fairly short, only a few weeks, but you know, there's many different species of bees, many honeybees and others on that tree. And the other one is manzanita. I have a big manzanita in my front yard, and that flowers earlier than other manzanitas that I see. It's a Austin Griffiths variety, but the flowers, the bell-shaped flowers, are a little bit hard for honeybees, I think, but the bumblebees that come out earlier in the year are all over it, and the hummingbirds. So that is another good one. Up to you, Denise.
Well, my favorites, I have over a dozen citrus trees in very large containers. So since citrus comes to bloom different times of the year, depending on the variety, It not only smells good, but the bees are really attracted to it. And I'm told that my honey has citrus notes for those with a finer palate. Rosemary, I know there's been a lot of back and forth in our blog about people whose rosemary has been in full bloom already. Mine's not quite, but it'll stay in bloom through late summer. Bees are all over it. It's right off the front stoop of my beehive. All different kinds of salvias, particularly the purple blue varieties. I talked about the one that has the bell-shaped flower and the nectar, and it just blooms for a very long period of time. My Berkeley pink, which actually the bees are all over because they see ultraviolet in it. They're easy to keep and easy to grow, and there's just so many different varieties. Borage, sunflowers, oregano, those tiny little white insignificant flowers that bees are just, they're all over during that flowering period. Gaillardias and heliotrope did really, really well last year, so I'm waiting to see what's going to do well this year. And of course, borage, for those of you that aren't familiar with it in terms of what it looks like, but it's a great nectar pollen plant. It gets a little rangy looking.
Weedy.
but again, you know, bees just adore the borage. And as you're walking through the garden, you can always nip off a little of those purple blossoms because they're wonderful just to kind of chew on too. Maybe it's because of the nectar. Oh, and the sunflowers are great if you can plant a variety that has multi heads on it rather than the big giant one, because you're going to get different blooming periods with the different multi heads on that. And then here again is this picture that Sheila spoke of, the germander that is. You look at it and you think, you know, it's an okay looking plant, but
There's the bee.
it's just packed with bees.
Yeah.
And then there's buckwheats, the asteraceae, coneflowers, mullein that's there on the left. It's a very tall, spiky looking plant. And the flowers just open and then they dry up and then more open and then more dry up as it's growing up. Globe mallow, verbascum, and fruit trees all have, all these flowers have nectar and pollen.
Okay, so we're going to do a quick run through a whole bunch of plants that are really good nectar plants. We already talked about the oregano, and you can see there the bee is on this plant, this flower that you'd look at and think, oh, that doesn't really look like much, but it provides good bee food. Manzanita. Apparently, the Howard McMinn and Sentinel varieties are a little bit more friendly to honeybees. Because it seems that they can get inside, get to the nectar inside, which obviously on my plant they have more difficulty with. Hibiscus, which I haven't personally grown, but there's rosemary, and Russian sage is a great bee plant, and it's very low water, so that's a good one to have. African basil, that's a plant I grow every year because, you know, a lot of people do grow that. It's absolutely covered with bees from probably May right through October until it freezes. Unfortunately, it's a sterile plant. You can't grow it from seed, but you can grow it really well from cuttings, and you know, it's available in nurseries everywhere. Heliotrope's another one. And then we have a whole bunch of salvias. These are all really good bee plants. As you can see, there's the bees. And if you notice the color of all these, purple, and here's red. Now, this is an example of a red flower, that's in my garden, and it's completely red, but I have bees all over it. So this is obviously one that has the ultraviolet guidelines in it, which I can't see. Some flowers will only provide pollen and not nectar. Yarrow is one, California poppy, which we all know about probably, and Ceanothus is another great one for early season because it's flowering around about now. Were you going to do any more of this, or was that me? Okay. Yeah. Consider ones that bloom further into the winter. Now I have a big bottlebrush tree in my yard, and it has some flowers on it for almost all the year, but the heaviest are in the spring and the fall. We'll get into trees in a little while. They're an important source, and we talked about manzanitas. You want?
Yeah, so if you're going to consider using cover crops, because you can put in cover crops even though you don't have a lot of space to do so. But it's a great way to put some density into planting. You know, in the fall, you've got mustard, falva, vetch, and clovers, and in the summer, you can plant buckwheats. So the reason that cover plants are so beneficial to soil is because of the way they feed the soil microbes. You've got vetch here, which is a legume, and legumes have the root structure that have the little nitrogen bulbs on the roots. And what they do is it feeds the soil and nourishes the soil with that nitrogen. And oftentimes when you get seed packets, it will be a mix of legumes and grains. And here's fava beans. Oftentimes gardeners use cover crop fava beans to enrich the soil, and as it begins to flower, then they will cut down the fava beans, because that's at the point when the soil has gotten the most out of the fava beans. But like me, I like the fava beans, so I let them go on ahead and produce the bean, and then I have to go back in and I'll add some compost. And then here on the right, you can see this wonderful dense patch of both mustard and phacelia. And it just makes it easy for pollinators that will pollinate those plants and our honeybees to really see that dense patch.
And that's another good point of contrast, because bees see contrast as well. So when you've got the different colors there, that would be presumably attractive to them.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into trees. As we all know, that flowering fruit trees are fantastic for bees. We want bees to pollinate them, and then we get our fruit. But don't forget flowering landscape trees as well. And they're good for many things, many reasons. A lot of trees produce pollen early in the season. And often the trees that you wouldn't think of necessarily for being good for bees, such as oak, maples, willows, and acacia, and elms, they all flower early and produce pollen for the bees, and probably propolis as well. So we're looking at fruit and nut trees. Red maple is another good one. And the tulip tree, the liriodendron, I mean, they can get pretty big, though. They're not always the best garden tree. The black locust robinia has great flowers in the summer. Bottlebrush we talked about. Western red bud is another good one. It's a native, it's low water, and it flowers in the spring. And then the wonderful Palo Verde. There's one thing I wanted to mention, which is not really to do with bees, but if you're going to plant trees or shrubs in your yard, you probably need to take into account the fire safety with planting. You don't want to put trees and shrubs any closer to your house than 5 feet. And the concern there is that if you have a tree next to your house and a fire comes through, then it can act as a ladder taking fire up to your roof. So that is one consideration if you're doing new planting. And I have put a good reference in our references for fire escaping. Another thing you can, if you haven't got a lot of garden space, there's always containers. You can grow a lot of bee-friendly plants in containers of all sorts. Some of the advantages, they can prolong the season. I mean, you can move them when it gets cold, you can move them to protect the plant, you can move it out of the hot sun. if that's a problem. And it actually allows quite dense planting if you don't have a lot of yard space. Oops, where's my, there it is. Okay, and containers come in all sorts of wonderful things. You can find them anything to suit your landscape. This particular picture says, well, don't throw away your old, don't get rid of your old car. I love this one, it's really cool. And what that also shows is that succulents can be a good bee plant. If all you have to do is go to the Ruth Bancroft garden in the summer when a lot of those succulents and cacti are flowering, and just see the number of bees that are on those. It's ridiculous. So yeah, don't forget succulents. Over to you.
Mhm. So last thing, consideration for plant selections. As we've been going through this, I'm just wondering if you've given it a thought about, can you recognize a flowering plant by its nectar source when looking at the features on it? So I just challenge all of you to begin looking at plants, to, if you don't know that it's nectar and or pollen, to see if you can figure that out. So again, you've got the choice of natives or non-natives. Natives are they need water their first 2 years, and then you can back off. Bees have adapted to both natives and non-natives, as our climate is very different. Some thrive differently than others. Again, watering needs, where you're going to put plants, are going to have similar watering needs to the plants that you have planted in the surrounding area. Don't forget about the possibilities of trees. Seed packets for a number of things, and then ongoing maintenance issues for whatever it is that you choose to select, because pruning is important. So if you're going to select a tree, for example, and you want to select for height, or you want to maintain it for a height, that's a consideration to take into account. The same thing is pruning for shrubs and bushes. If you're going to leave a messier garden, which is great for bees until the very end, and it's great for other pollinators that are coming in, that's great. But during its blooming season, you might want to keep it, as Sheila had said, prune it back, because then you'll force more buds out of the tree.
Yeah, there was one other thing that we were talking about, that obviously when the winter comes and this plant stops flowering, you can then prune it back fairly hard, especially the salvias. That really helps for them. But some plants have hollow stems, and we want to not take those out completely, because they're great nesting areas for cavity nesting native bees. So there again, there's a ton of information about this. We can't get into details, but just consider, don't completely clean up your garden in the winter. Leave enough for the pollinators.
So we're going to post everything here, presentation and all these resources, on the MDBA website. And it's a lot of plant suggestions. If you want to, we've got also resource for getting to the website for the Master Gardener program, if you're looking for some specific guidelines on planting, how to plant and so forth. But our website is, we're going to put all this information plus.
Okay, one last thing I really wanted to talk about, and I want to give a big shout out for the UC Davis Honeybee Haven. Now, I'm sure that most of you probably know about it. You've probably been there, but it's a really important resource. They've got, they have a lot of information online about gardening for bees, so you can find out tons of stuff there. They provide resources for bee gardeners like us, and they inspire and encourage visitors to create pollinator habitat gardens. And they also do observation and study of bees and the plants that support them. A few years ago, Denece and I met with Dr. Christine Casey at the garden, and she gave us a tour and a lot of information. We learnt a lot of stuff there. Among what we learnt was that bees' nutritional needs change over the season, and that various plants vary in nectar and pollen composition. For example, bees need different amino acids in their protein in the spring and in the fall. And so we have different plants, the appropriate plants to provide this should be available to them. And fortunately, it seems that spring and fall varieties do that. But that really underscores the need for planting varieties, you know, a good variety of plants that bloom over the year in our yards. And the same goes with nectar. Nectar composition varies too. So bees do need a lot of different sources. We learned that plant preference can vary from year to year. And I've noticed this too, that a plant which one year will be absolutely covered with bees and you think, oh, I need to plant this again next year, or I need more of this. And the next year it's like the bees go, we're going somewhere else. But apparently that's quite common. So don't give up if the bees don't go to your favorite plant next year. They'll probably find it the year after. And the other important thing was, you know, observe what's happening in your garden. Take notes from year to year so that you know what the bees like and you know what's doing good for them. Unfortunately, Dr. Casey's position at the bee garden has been eliminated and she's moved on. But for the years she was there, she produced a blog, The Bee Gardener. And the archived articles from this blog are still up there on their website, and it's well worth a look. But they do now have a new garden coordinator, and so the work goes on. And the links to the Bee Garden are there on our resource page. Lots of resources. We have recommended plant lists from there again. These are local from the UC Berkeley Urban Bee Lab. A Honeybee Haven has plant lists, and then there's Dr. Casey's blog. If you're interested in more about honeybee nutrition, which we have not had time to get into here, but there's a great presentation from the late Kim Flutton online, and also about pesticides from Alina Nino and Randy Oliver. And then our Master Gardener, UC Master Gardener website is there. And if you want to know anything about plants, gardening, what have you, you can go there and you can navigate to find a ton of stuff. There's also links to our help desk. So if you have particular questions about gardening, you can write into the help desk and hopefully somebody will come up with a good answer. More about thinking and seeing as a bee. We've got that there as well. Yeah, so just browse through that lot and find stuff that interests you. There are a few books that I found really helpful. California Bees and Blooms by Gordon Franke and others is about the Bible for pollinator gardens in California. The Xerxes Society has a good one. Also, I really like this book, The Bee Friendly Garden by Kate Fry and Gretchen LeBoon. Kate Fry is an absolutely fantastic landscape designer. She's done wonderful gardens, and they're all very sustainable and very pollinator friendly. So that book is definitely worth a look. And yeah, so now that's about all we have so far. If you have any questions,
Shoot them our way.
shoot them away. All right. So we need to stop sharing now, don't you?
No, he said leave it.
Pardon?
Leave it here.
Okay.
So I think folks are welcome to, if you want to raise your hand, call on you, they call you, or we can post, if you want to post a question in the chat, I'll make sure that we read that out loud. Susan, I see your hand there.
I'm waving my hand.
Excellent.
So thank you so much. I have recently joined the Herb Society and am really looking at Herb Society, like herbs, my bees, and how it all works together. And so you've just given me even more to think about before I head up to Morning Sun and start buying things. But I had a question, a couple things. I have something that I pulled out my little app to go, what the heck is this bush? There are bees all over it. It looks like it's called inkberry. Do you know what that is?
Inkberry.
Inkberry is what my little app said it was, but there are bumblebees and honeybees all over this. And I didn't know what it was. So anyways, curious if you knew anything about it.
You know, I'm not immediately familiar with inkberry, but you know, you did the right thing by, you know, looking at your app, because those are pretty good. The other thing is, if you really want to know, take a photo of it and send it into the Master Gardener Help Desk, because
Okay.
they're pretty good at at identifying plants. So if you really want to know, then shoot them a photo. or
You know,
couple of
what it
photos.
said in there too was that they saw it a lot in Appalachia, and a lot of East Coast honey producers have a lot of inkberry there. That's what it said.
Wow.
How it ended up in my yard. But my other question to you is, and this might be a slight deviation, is somebody gave me one of those natural or native bee little houses. Where's a good place to put those? Do you put those out by your beehives? What do you do with those?
Do you think it was from mason bees?
Yeah,
It might be. It's those little houses with the little teeny, a whole bunch of little holes or, things.
Yeah.
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 As far as I know, I've seen people put them kind of in wood piles or up against a fence, because they're typically they're looking to, as a singular solitary bee, and to make their nest is to kind of burrow in, which is why you're given the more straw tubular looking nesting sites for those. But that's my experience with them.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it next to your own hive. I mean, not that they're
Okay. But just more into like a woody part of my backyard, like the fence,
Yeah.
or something. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much. This is great.
Thank you.
Hey, I got a comment quickly for Susan. Maybe trying the Google app, and there's like on their website, there's a little camera on the right-hand side, and if you click on that and you point your smart device into whatever plant you're looking at, it'll tell you exactly what it is. That's what I've used.
Yeah, and so I have the, $40 a year version called on my, it's an app, and you take a picture and it actually gives you the plant information and all the information. But that's a great, I didn't know you could just do it for free.
You'll save
but-
$40 a year.
Yeah, or maybe it's 30, but yeah, it's called Inkberry, and it gave me all kinds of information about it. And it said bees love it. Yeah.
Yes.
So if you also wanted to post a picture of that in the gardening forum, or gardening for
Okay.
bees,
That's a
in
good
one of
point.
the forums, then it'd be great. We can all look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was walking by going, oh, geez, there's like bees everywhere. But it's just buzzing. The whole great big tree is just solid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter, I see your hand up. Maybe we'll go to Peter, and then we have a question in the chat from Ruby after Peter.
All right, thanks, Ian. So my question's about, we're talking about the hollow stemmed plants that some of the native bees will use as nesting sites. Do you cut the stems and leave them lying on the ground, or do you want to just leave them intact growing up? Which is the better way that the bees use these?
From what I understand, and I'm not an expert in native bees, but cut it short, but not all the way down to the ground. So leave about a foot, and the bees will find it. Just don't cut it all the way down to the ground or pull it out.
Okay. So they use the stems then that are still in the ground, not if you cut them and left the stalks on the ground next to the plant, they wouldn't use those.
No, I think I guess the problem there is that the stem might get wet and then collapse or something. But the advice I've read is that just cut it to about a foot and leave it. And there's native bees. There's the ground nesters and there's the cavity nesters, and there's the ones that nest in hollow stalks. So the more that we can leave for them, the more that we can leave for them that they can choose from. And just because you do it doesn't mean to say they'll come, but they might, and it's worth it.
Thank you.
The question in the chat is do you do anything to deter squirrels in the garden?
Oh, God.
Every time they plant seeds, they get destroyed. So anything to deter squirrels, and specifically maybe when planting seeds, any precautions or ways to avoid that?
I would be a millionaire if I had the answer to that one.
Yeah, they carry around little ladders if you try and put things up too high, too far in. Yeah, it's learning to live with squirrels. I don't know, maybe somebody else in this chat tonight.
The only thing I would say is if I'm planting seeds or very small plants in my raised bed, then I usually put I just cover it with chicken wire or something like that, just to stop the squirrels digging it up again, because they do. And hopefully that gives the plant a chance to get a bit bigger. And the squirrels don't see this wonderful bare ground that they can just go and dig. That helps a bit. But when it comes to ripe fruit or tomatoes or something, then forget it. Get a dog.
Plant enough for yourself.
Yeah,
and
so that's
sharing.
Yeah, but the dog is good too. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about squirrels. Our garden, as well as parts of the Lafayette Community Garden, they've got electric wire along the fence line. So it doesn't solve all the rodent problems, whether it's rats or squirrels, but it does help deter quite a few.
Yeah, I was going to say an electric fence, because I recall when the master gardeners first were putting something in out at Shadelands, they had to resort to that.
Oh, yeah.
They tried a lot of different things, and finally they had to resort to the electric fence to keep things out of the vegetables.
They still have it, and pests still get in sometimes. They've got the wire buried 2 feet down under the ground and then flared out, and things still dig in and hop over the fence, or not so much, but they do.
Well, thank you. We're at 8 o'clock here. I want to thank once again Sheila and Denece for the presentation. Thank you very much, and thanks everyone to coming tonight. I'm gonna share my screen for a second, Denece and Sheila, just to
Do we
let you
need
know.
to stop share here?
If you could, yeah, thank you very
Yeah.
much. I just want to let people know as an announcement, this will be a monthly occurrence, this Zoom speaker series, and we have speakers sort of lined up for the rest of the year. And our next speaker, for those of you who can join us, is going to be Fred Dunn, who runs a very popular YouTube channel and speaks to a lot of different beekeepers throughout the country and the world. He'll be talking about honeybee drift and other behaviors observed. His presentations are very kind of video image focused. So he does a lot of videography and images. That'll be on Thursday, March 27th at 6 p.m. because he'll be joining us from home in Pennsylvania. So we're going to move the time a little bit earlier for that. Once again, Sheila and Denece, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. And thanks to everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.